Hi everyone, and welcome back to my channel TCNT, which is True Crime and Trials, and today it's the Mark Sievers Trial Day 9. There's a lot of tension in the courtroom today because Mark is being asked by the judge if he's going to testify, and I think everybody will not be surprised at all to know that it's a no from Mark. I'm kind of disappointed. I would have liked to have heard from him, but it doesn't surprise me. So the defence rests its case. So the judge goes through the charges, along with the first-degree murder and the conspiracy charge. Second-degree murder and manslaughter are now added to the charges. So yeah, after he's gone through all that, they have a recess, let everyone get a chance to gather themselves ready for closing arguments. So we start with the prosecution closing. And because this is aimed at the jury, they go through the charges and what it means and what evidence they need to look at to prove that why he's been charged with what he's being charged with, and to give them a clearer idea of he's done this, so you can tick that box off in that charge. And he's been charged with being with being a principal, which I'll explain a bit later on. I don't know why I can't talk today, sorry. So she says, like I've just said, she goes over the evidence that proves Mark's guilty, like the burner phone, paying Wright $600, giving Wright the alarm code, telling Wright when Teresa would be home on the day of the murder, planning the murder for when Teresa would be home alone, and making sure that he and the girls weren't there. Giving Wright the alarm code for the parking lot because one of the plans to kill Teresa was outside her work while she was going up into the parking lot to make it look like a mugging. And the door up into the lot needed a code, and he'd given Wright that code. And being more concerned about the arrest of Mark, being more concerned about Wright being arrested than his wife being dead. The coded messages to indicate each other to use the burner phones, when they put, what message was it? Hello, brother, from an other mother. I mean, there was numerous texts with the word other in, and I think it would have been quite obvious. They can't it's so obvious, and it's they give props to the defence because they've tried, but it's just the evidence is just screaming in your face what happened. Even though Curtis Wright doesn't look like the most credible person, some things you just cannot excuse that are screaming that this was planned, and Mark Sievers did want his wife dead. And obviously the money from the life insurance policies, and there's a coded message to say that he was going to destroy his burner phone and destroy the SIM. So the prosecution shows the jury texts that have been sent between Mark and Curtis, and the prosecution points out that Mark and Curtis spoke almost every day via texts and phone calls, as you can see in the pictures, and they were like this almost every day. But on the 26th of June, it was the day that the Sievers went to Connecticut to see Teresa's family. There were only 2 text messages. and they were early on in the morning. Then on the 27th, which was the day that Wright and Rogers travelled to Florida, there was a lot of missed calls on Curtis Wright's regular phone because he had left that phone at home and only taken the burner phone, and Mark was desperate to get hold of Curtis Wright. Mark had also sent Curtis Wright a text on his regular phone saying, "No need to call me, hope you're having a nice day." This man is sick. There were no calls or texts on 28th of June because Mark knew what was happening. There were no calls and texts on the 29th of June, the day he found out his wife was dead. He called Danielle, which is one of Teresa's friends, and he called Bethany as well, but he never called his best friend, Curtis. Why? Because Curtis already knew. Curtis killed her, and Mark knew. That's why he didn't ring his best friend. You know, the best friend that he's known since they were at school, and, you know, they're so tight and really good friends, and yeah, he didn't ring him to say that his wife was dead. And at this point, you take a look at Mark, and it's just like a wave of realisation goes over him, and he's sitting there thinking, is this is it? It's nearly over. And one of the biggest points was that Mark never asked why. He never asked why his wife was murdered, why Curtis Wright was arrested, why his wife was murdered. And I don't know if you remember that when Dr. Petritus called Mark and told him to come home straight away, Mark didn't ask him why either. Why? What's happened? Which again screamed guilt. I mean, any man would be in an absolute panic, asking why, what's happened, but he never did. So the prosecution are going through a chain conspiracy, which is like, you know, you've got Jimmy Ray Rogers here, Curtis Wright here, and Mark Sievers here. You know, so obviously Curtis Wright is in the middle because he's speaking to Mark and Rogers, and Wright is talking to Mark, and they're arranging the murder, and, you know, he's recruited Rogers. So that's, you know, even though Mark wasn't there, he's still part of it because he's part of the chain of conspiracy. And then the prosecution do a small presentation about the evidence that proves Mark is guilty, and also showing the jury what they can and can't do, and basically saying, why would Wright act on his own with Rogers to murder Teresa? What motive did he have to kill Teresa? There hasn't been any motive even remotely put out there. Even the defence didn't basically put out a motive for Curtis just to go and kill her. The prosecution have finished their closing argument now, but before the defence do their closing arguments, the judge has to speak to someone in court because someone has been filming people leaving the court, which is obviously not allowed. And the person who did the filming wasn't in court, but the person that hired someone to do the filming was a private investigator, but no one knows who hired him. And I mean, the judge is fuming, and he was told to leave, but the guy that did the filming was told to go to court, back to court by the end of the day. I don't know what's happened with that. So that was that. Then on to the defence closing argument. He starts by saying Teresa is dead because Curtis Wright killed her. He's saying that the state lumped Mark Sievers in with Wright and Rogers to make him look guilty. I don't think that's the case because, yes, Curtis Wright has the 3 previous testimonies where he lied, but you can see where he was trying to cover his tracks or cover his track, the path that led them to Mark Sievers. I mean, Rogers has already been convicted. The defence goes down the principle theory. Again, principle meaning that you don't have to be in the state of the murder or at the crime scene when the crime is committed. But then he points out that if that applies to Mark, then why doesn't it apply to Angela, which is a bloody good question. And he's saying the state's only evidence is there being an actual conspiracy is from Curtis Wright. So he spends time talking about all the lies in Wright's testimony. And he tries to justify the text a few days after Teresa's murder about Mark being excited to go to St. Louis with his daughters. There's no mention of Teresa, but he says Mark often went to visit Curtis in St. Louis without Teresa, just him and the kids, which is fair enough, I guess. I mean, she could be busy, who knows. Then he's back onto Curtis and saying he lied to implicate Mark as being the orchestrator of his wife's murder. And one of those lies being Mark saying that Rogers used the claw part of the hammer, but obviously the medical examiner said that wasn't the case. So yeah, that is an obvious lie. But to be honest, I don't think Curtis could come up with this whole story on his own. I really don't. There is no forensic evidence to say a second hammer was used either, which, no, there isn't. When he was giving his initial testimonies, when he was saying he wasn't in the house, he didn't know what happened, and that Rogers did it. This was interviews with the state as well, saying he didn't do it, it was Rogers, and they're saying, no, I don't believe you. Then saying, he said, okay, I was in the house, but I was in a different room. Still didn't believe him. Then the third time, when he said he hit her 3 times and Rogers did the same with a different hammer, they then took his word. So basically they're saying that the first 2 statements he gave, the state didn't believe him. They were only interested in him admitting it. Which I understand, but Curtis Wright doesn't come across as the type of guy that would just fess up straight away. I think he would try and cover his tracks, especially to protect his best friend. And I think that's what he was doing. Dr. Petritis has also told the court that he wasn't very close with Mark, but he had spare keys to his house. And he says the existence of life insurance policies does not give motive for murder. Well, it does in quite a lot of cases. Murder for money. Again, questioning why Wright hadn't taken a polygraph test when it's part of his plea deal, which I'd like to know the answer to that as well, because if it's part of his plea deal, why hasn't he taken one? And I think that really frustrates the heck out of the defence. because, you know, if it's proved he's a blatant liar, then they've nothing then. Oh, another good point he made, which we hadn't heard, is that the fact that this burner phone that Angie had, she only had it for 2 days, on the 28th and 29th of June 2015. Still, again, why wasn't she investigated? But again, I think maybe part of his plea deal, he asked for his wife to be left alone. That's why he was so concerned about his wife. So I think, you know, he confesses, gets a plea deal, and he says, I'll take the plea deal if you leave my wife alone. Just, you know. So, there we go. Jury is out for deliberation, so... Right, so I'll see you back here with a verdict video. Bye for now.